Okay, thanks everybody for watching. Hello. Um, so I guess I'm gonna start from where I left off yesterday, which was basically once they left the Four Corners or Owen's Corner. So the real time is between 1:32 and 1:40. There's nothing on the airwaves, and that's because they are at Owen's Corner planning the intervention. So at 1:40, it all begins again, and so we first hear Wally on the phone, and we're not quite sure what he says, and then another officer that says 10-4. You hear the female officer that's in vehicle 1 tell everybody to be careful, to use prudence, and to be clear. She says that, everyone's supposed to be calm. They check the PA to make sure that it works, and then you hear Wally calling Luke, and he says, "Hey, Luke," and you hear Luke very clearly say yes, and he asks if it comes in clearly. Wally asks Luke about where he is and about where he saw the suspect for the last time. Wally mentions that he was last seen at the around IGA. He was on foot going towards Cowansville. And then you hear Wally ask Luke where he was, and he says, "I'm on Moeco. I'll be at the corner in about 2 minutes." And then all of a sudden you hear Wally say, "Il est là, il est là." So you see, which means that he's there. You hear Luke say, "Where?" And he says, "Chez Chins." And so he says, "Okay, Wally." And you hear Wally say, "Okay, he's got a gun in his hands, in his left hand." And then you hear Luke ask him, "Hey, Wally, what kind of gun is it? Is it a firearm?" And you hear Wally say, "Oui, yes," and then shots fired. So you hear Luke say there was some some gunshots, and you hear Wally say, "Yeah," and you hear Luke, so I'm going to hear in that, you hear Luke say, "Okay, I'm going to stop at the IGA, and I'm going to get my weapon ready." Wally's partner, you hear her on the 911 call, and she says that he's on the ground, he's been shot, and he's not moving. You hear her again say he's on the ground, he's not moving. And then you hear him ask for the ambulance. So that's about it. There's a little bit of talking once they're there, but from basically the minute that which is 1:43:40, which is the real time, and at 1:44:41 you hear shots fired. So it literally was 61 seconds. What happens after the shooting is that, there's a lot of stuff that goes on, as they say. But when it's a BEI investigation, so when the police are involved in the shooting, the police officers have to give a declaration. They're supposed to give the declaration without having talked with each other. They're supposed to do it alone or without influence, so they can't go back and listen to the 911 call. They just write it as they go. So, as I said in the last video, I'm going to go over the declarations because I was able to hear them as they were written. They were written in French. It's written in point form. It's not a question and answer period. It's really them just writing what had happened. I did that. I've written, or the nights that happened, the first 3 days after Riley died, I wrote down everything, especially what had happened at the hospital, because, the hospital was really traumatic. So I'm going to give you the declarations of the vehicle one, which had a female SQ officer. And I also believe that she was kind of like in charge that night, but the roles kind of seem to have perhaps gotten reversed. But anyways, they're in vehicle one, they're in the lead, and she's with Wally. So at this time, Wally's driving, I think, and then they switch it up when they get to the Owens Corner. So I might have to look at my notes a little bit because I just don't want to forget anything. So she's the one that mentions having no flashes and no sirens. It's a high risk. She also mentions in her declaration about where they're going to be pointing or where they're going to put their vehicles, I guess, when they apprehend the suspect. She confirms that Luke was called. And so again, you're going to have a time of like when they were called. So it's basically from 1:20 a.m. until 1:44 a.m. And I'm not going to talk too much about what she did like once Riley was on the ground. It's basically what the BEI investigates, which is just, that the shots were fired. So, all right, so she confirms that Luke was called, and as they arrive, she says, so as they arrive into town, they arrive slower than the speed limit because they don't know where he was. And then all of a sudden, so it's really that quick, she says all of a sudden she mentions to her partner that he is there. And that he corresponds to the description. They're in the lead vehicle. And she says that is at that moment that she turns on her flashes. She stops the vehicle and she grabs the PA and says, "Bouge pas, don't move, police, drop your gun." And she says this a few times. She mentions that they're at Chin's, that he's wearing a black toque, he's dressed all in black, he has a big backpack, and his weapon looks like a 9mm. She says he's walking. He had his gun along his thigh. She said she told him several times to drop your gun, 2-3 times. Then he starts waving his weapon towards us and he's screaming, but she doesn't understand what he's screaming. She said she saw 2 of the other cops get out of their vehicles. So she's basically in the front, then there's a car behind, and then there's a third car. So there's 1, 2, 3, kind of like in an arrow. And there's probably 10 feet between the spaces of the cars, maybe 30 feet, and then a little bit in distance. So they're not all be side by side. And she says that when the 2 officers get out of the car, that they both demand that the suspect drop his weapon. She says there were 3 advancing towards the suspect, demanding that he drops his weapon, and there were no results. And she says it's at this moment that she heard a detonation, and then someone say shots fired, and then she saw that the suspect had collapsed. So that's her declaration. It's about 1,000, maybe 1,500 words. It's not a lot. She talks about what they talked about a little bit at Owens Corner, but not in great detail. And if there was, I wasn't told what they were. About her, she was the one that was at Sutton, her and her partner, Wally. So this is going to be Wally's declaration. And again, I kind of, I shortened it quite a bit. So he corroborates what he said and what she said. He mentions that suspect was on foot towards Cowansville, that he seemed to be in crisis. Wally's the one that called Riley, the demandar, he's the one that called 911. He asked again for a description of the suspect. Riley said that he was like a teenager, ado, he seemed to be in crisis. He was waving the gun around, walking away from the IGA towards Cowansville. Wally said he called Luke. This is a little bit off, but whatever, there's no questioning. It's just really a declaration. So he mentions that he had thought about maybe barricading close to the IGA, but changed his decision on that, because what if the suspect goes into a house and starts shooting people? So he wanted to locate and negotiate to secure the city against an attack. They take the lead. He tells her to drive, so he tells his partner to drive. He talks about the negotiating, that if the suspect is in English, that he's going to speak, and if it's French, someone else is going to. Once they drive into the village, they slow down. So again, it's pretty much the same. He says that his partner mentions that she sees the suspect. Vehicle is stopped about plus or minus 100 meters from the restaurant, and he says he starts talking. So he says that he took the PA and said drop is your weapon, and that he saw in his left hand that he had a weapon. He says that after first contact with the suspect, he was walking around everywhere, screaming, "I planned this for 5 years." So he says that he hears this, "I planned this for 5 years." He says he's about to get out of the car, but that his partner pulled him back in. He had drawn his weapon. He mentions that Riley's approaching, pointing his weapon everywhere. He says that he got scared at that time for himself and his colleagues, that he considered raising his weapon and perhaps shooting through the windshield if the subject started shooting. So it is at this time that he heard a detonation and said shots fired over the airwaves. He said he thought that it was him who had fired, but then he saw that the suspect collapsed. So again, it's 61 seconds. That's definitely verified. And I just want to mention again that the reason that we were able to get that information is because Wally says he's there and shots fired. And you can hear a little bit of him and Luke talking in between. So had it not been for those two radio contacts, we wouldn't have known. So they talk a little bit more about what happened after, once Riley fell, about the things that they did or didn't do. To me, that's not important at this time. So I'm gonna stop this, load this up, and make a second video, because it took almost 20 hours to upload that other video yesterday, which is like just a little ridiculous. Or maybe not 20 hours, sorry, 12. So I'm going to just upload this one, and then work on the second vehicle. So again, thanks for watching. I appreciate it. You can comment, tell me what you think. I'm still waiting on a lot of information, but this is about, like I said yesterday, I'll try to get us to about today. So thanks again. Be kind to each other. I'll see you later.